Hey everyone, Colin here at the beginning. So during this episode, we thanked a lot of people, but as I was editing it, I realized we made one crucial oversight. We forgot to thank our friends at Test Stream, this wonderful band who has provided theme music for us throughout this entire podcast. So thank you, Test Stream, specifically Brian Wakefield, for kindly lending us this song that you hear at the beginning and often at the end of all of our episodes. So, Test Stream, one last time, bring us in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hop-Ons podcast, a podcast sponsored by our Patreon supporters. My name is Colin Cox. Well, we're no longer a community podcast, are we?
How sad. My name is John Phelps. Welcome to, this is where like the fray would start playing, like one of those songs. How to save a life, where did I go wrong? That's what we play it. This week on the CW, that's what our commercial would be. Welcome to the sunset of our great show.
Yeah.
That we have done for 8 fucking years.
So, John, I double-checked the preview episode for this podcast. Can you guess the actual date, the full date?
It had to have been in the summer of 2016, but I don't know when.
A little later, but you're correct on the year.
Okay.
October the 1st, 2016.
October 1. So we're 7 years and 9 months, give or take.
Yeah, I think that's right.
That's a lot. It's a lot of
podcasting.
Of us talking.
Yeah.
What have you learned, Colin, over these last 8 years? About yourself, about the podcast, about media?
Well, we can get into that. But, John, I know because this is sad, right? Because this is, in theory, our final episode. We do have a couple of Patreon episodes. But, John, exciting news.
Oh.
Very exciting news.
Please don't be.
So,
don't be a barker bite.
It's not a barker bite. Okay, John.
Okay.
John. As you know, as we have worked on ending the podcast, I have successfully transitioned the podcast into something akin to an artificial intelligence media empire. So, John, I didn't have an opportunity to consult with you about this because time was of an
shocking
essence. So, we have successfully agreed upon a collaboration with Crumble. Do you know Crumble?
The cookie company.
Yeah, the gourmet cookie company. So, John,
now here's the thing. I do not want to see any if you have a photo of me as the Cookie Monster, I'm going to be quite upset.
I do not, but I need you to check your inbox. So, John, what we've done, we communicated, so they really like our little knobbers. So, we will...
Who wouldn't?
So, this is a Crumble Hop-Ons Incorporated Lil Knobbers collaboration. And so I've just sent something to your inbox. I would like you to check it and tell me what you think.
Now I have it. Okay. All right. So... So now... Well, okay, so you've sent me 2 pictures here, and now one of them is it's got the Crumble logo, which I'm assuming they gave you to use for this wonderful advertisement.
Of course.
And you have and you've really used some great words here to describe the Lil Knobbers selection at...
Well, this is the official name
Crumble
for the Lil Knobbers collaboration.
Oh, it is?
Yeah, so these are the fantastic, unbelievable, crunchy Knobbers selection, which will be available in Crumble stores.
And now if you were to spell out the first letters, it does say fucks. The fantastic Unbelievable crunchy knobbers selection, Hop-Ons Incorporated. And then there's a picture of Thanos.
Right. Okay. So this is where we
And
can.
Thanos is snapping his fingers, and in his fingers are 2 Oreos.
Well, they're 2 cookies. But John, no, this is also an excellent multimedia opportunity where we can successfully use our proprietary AI software to seamlessly integrate cookies into popular movies. So instead of Thanos, snapping his fingers and destroying the universe, maybe he's a little hangry. So he just has, a couple of fucks.
That's right. Crumble knows how to fucks.
Right? Isn't this great?
Thank you so much for that. Thank you for allowing that to be what starts the podcast off with.
Yep.
All right. Now, can we talk about this?
I mean, we can, or we could talk about that.
Is there a lot to talk about? I mean, what are we going to talk about? I don't know.
You don't know? You
You listened to us, or you didn't. If you didn't, why are you listening to this fucking episode? I mean, I'm weird. I like to hear the last of something to see, like, when if something bad happens in the episode and there's
sure,
a big fight or something. But that's not going to be here.
Oh.
This is going to be very, I would say, quite. I mean, not lackluster, but I don't know if I have great memories of the show. I have some bad ones, but I have some pretty good ones.
Here's maybe one place where we can start.
Oh, okay. You have okay. Go ahead.
We've spoken about 3 shows: Arrested Development, Twin Peaks, and Community. If you had this to do again, I don't think we would necessarily choose anything but Arrested Development. But for the other 2, would you, because we bandied about some other possibilities, would you have taken that road instead? I'm curious if, not necessarily you regret, because that's not what I'm asking. After doing 3 shows, have you had any thoughts about, I think it would be interesting if we did this instead? Not, I regret what we did, but I don't know, maybe this other alternative would be interesting.
Yeah, I don't think so. I mean, I know that we floated a lot of ideas. The Good Place was one that I always thought would be really quite fun to do, but I think The Good Place suffers from, like, it's too good, which is wild to say, but it's just so good. And there's not a lot to, like, I think that's what I like the most about the shows we chose, is that all the shows have a lot of flaws to them. And I don't know if there would have been another show we could have chosen that had, like, so many good shining moments of light, but also, like, were so deeply flawed and had so many interesting network choices, backroom choices, things like that. So I think that I think it would have been interesting to do something like The Good Place. But in the end, I'm happy with what we did.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, I think the shows we selected reflect to some degree what we like about television, which is exactly what you just said. The imperfect nature of television. The fact that television, while different shows do these beautiful, aesthetically satisfying things, they're also maybe just pieces of intellectual property that help you waste time. But let's be clear, it's not like, film or novels haven't or don't do the same thing. I mean, my goodness, the history of film is quite fascinating because at its genesis, it was really just, a propaganda tool so that you could, learn information about the world when you would leave your home and go into public. Novels, for example, I mean, figures like Thomas Jefferson, for example, he's quite famous for deriding the novel. He was incredibly sexist when he said this, as just these trifles for women to read to
Oh.
occupy their time, and like men read like history and philosophy, So TV, it's doing something that what I suspect a lot of people consider maybe more aesthetically reputable mediums have done in the past. But as you said, all three of these shows are incredibly imperfect at times, and that's part of
Yeah.
what makes them so wonderful to discuss. And I agree with you. I mean, you and I did discuss a show like The Good Place, but it's a little too good to
It is. Yeah, it's quite good.
maybe actually talk about in ways that I think we like to. I think some of the philosophy is really interesting, and I would have enjoyed maybe reading
Yeah.
a
Oh, yeah.
little more about that and learning a little more about it. We also talked about a show like Parks and Rec, and I'm glad we didn't do it because I've soured on that show a little bit in the last couple of
Have you?
years. Yeah, a
It's
little bit. A
interesting.
little bit, yeah.
I think the reason, one of the big reasons, I'm one of the main reasons I'm glad we didn't do it is because it just aped so much from Hurwitz and Arrested Development, because Arrested Development was before its time in the way that it was handling the sort of one camera show, and the jokes that it was telling, and how it was getting gags pulled off. And Parks and Rec copied a lot from The Office, but I think they pulled a lot from the insanity of Hurwitz. And so yeah, I think I'm glad we didn't go there. A show that I really was hoping we would do was Mad Men, but I think we were coming out of Twin Peaks and we didn't want to do something incredibly dour because we'd just done something incredibly dour, and it's also fucking long. I mean, Mad Men's like five. It's like over 80, 90 episodes probably of just
Yeah.
an hour long heavy television. I think that could have been fun to discuss. Would have been Mad Men, but I think by the end of it you would have wanted to strangle me and everyone else by the amount of research you had done
Yeah,
on Mad
I think
Men.
that's like shows like that really worry me because I would want to learn as much as I can, and I'm interested in like American studies. Is if I were to pursue a PhD at some point, it would probably be in like American literature or American history, but just finding time to do that and prep for a 1 hour episode, like that's part of what made the
Oh
Twin
God,
Peaks
yeah.
seasons so hard, was just the amount of prep necessary. Oh, and you need to watch a 1 hour show where people don't speak straight. It's very bizarre. Yeah, that really made things
Yeah.
complicated. I know we had also it's interesting even thinking about the shows we didn't consider, or shows that when we were getting close to the end of Arrested Development, shows that we mentioned but then almost immediately dismissed, like The Office. I think that seemed like a show
Yeah.
that would be a kind of natural fit, but I think both of us just said no. I have no interest in talking about that show. I don't even remember why. Like, why do you think we didn't want to discuss either The Office or 30 Rock or any of these like NBC shows that were incredibly popular in ways Arrested Development was, or
Yep.
wasn't.
Right. I actually was thinking about this yesterday. I was thinking about The Office as a show and how people just went fucking crazy for her. I think we could do the UK version and actually it would probably be a very nice conversation. But I think the American version, like, it became this sort of juggernaut. And when you take a step back and look at that show, it's really not that good of a show. I think it has way more valleys than it does peaks, and I think after like season 3, maybe season 4, it just gets very boring, and they seem to just sort of recycle the same things over and over, and the characters become extremely unlikable. And as far as tone goes, like they can't ever choose a right lane because you think it's going to be this like satirical, almost mean comedy when it starts out, and then it gets really lovey-dovey. And Michael Scott, who I think Steve Carell was phenomenal and deserved an Emmy for his work, but they didn't know how to handle him. And I just think the show is, I think it's kind of boring, and I don't think we would have got much out of it, honestly, because there's only so many times we can say Jim and Pam, huh? Jim and Pam.
Yeah, comedy's really tough, right? Because
It is,
it
yeah.
has both well, a good comedy or even a good joke reminds me of an avocado, where there are times when it's a little too early, when maybe it's you need to wait for this to be funny, but then if you're not careful, it becomes overripe. Like I think about something like, and this seems maybe a bit dark, but even like Abraham Lincoln assassination jokes, like when did those at some point someone has told a really great Abraham Lincoln assassination joke, but
Sure.
you probably couldn't tell that in 1866, right? But I wonder
Yeah.
now, like I don't know, man, if I went with Michael to one of those open mic nights, and like part of my type five was an Abraham Lincoln assassination joke, I just don't know how well that would go, right? So I
Right.
think that's, and I mentioned that only because I think that's really part of the problem with a show like The Office. It was incredibly funny for this one particular moment in time. I remember liking it and really, or watching it and really liking it, but anytime I look back on it, it reminds me of a lot of movies from that particular moment in time, where I mean movies like Anchorman and a lot of the
Oh, sure.
like those like Judd Apatow movies that
Hmm.
I just watch now, and I think these are not that funny. I get why they were funny 20 years ago or 15 years ago, but
Yeah.
I remember John rewatching Anchorman maybe last summer and thinking I don't like this. This is all very boring. Like the bloopers are the funniest part. And that really does say something about like the sensibilities of that particular moment in time, where where the only thing you would probably want to watch now are the blooper reels, and the actual content itself is not that interesting. I was thinking of others. It's interesting to me that we did talk about a show like Mad Men, but we never considered shows like The Sopranos or Breaking Bad or anything. And I don't know why those shows didn't seem worth it to us, but they just didn't seem like something we wanted to do.
I think I would have enjoyed doing The Sopranos. I think, but that it would all just have devolved into terrible New Jersey accents on my part. So we missed out on that comedy trope. In some multiverse, we've done the Sopranos podcast. Breaking Bad, I also was just not a big fan of that show in
Oh, really?
general.
Okay.
It's okay. I think it was one of those shows. Again, it's been lauded so much, and I guess rightfully so. But I just find it to be kind of boring. It's not up my alley. I know a show that I did want to do was like Game of Thrones. I think, but it was just again so long and so much heavy material, so many things to keep track of. I think that with Twin Peaks, it was just like mind-boggling there towards, and especially in the
Hmm.
return, there was so much fucking going on. We were trying to figure out who's who and what's happening, and yeah, I think prestige television is interesting. And again, with The Sopranos and Breaking Bad, those are shows that you can consider to be too good. I think the reason I liked Mad Men so much is because I think it explores such a dark era of American history, and it's also done extraordinarily. It just looks great. The acting is superb, and I think it would have been fun to dive into that. But again, too heavy, way too heavy. That's the biggest issue.
Yeah, and it's interesting because Mad Men is a show that, at least when it starts, if I remember correctly, it's either directly situated in or immediately following this moment of time in American history when a lot of people, a lot of boomers consider like this is where we need to return to this, like the 1950s and early 1960s, completely discounting, for example, what it must have, what being black in the United States in the mid 20th century was probably like, which I think is part of the point of the show. It's just interesting that that's the, I think I mentioned this at some point that an older person I know said this to me once, that like basically the 50s and 60s were like the best of times, to which I responded, well, unless you were black or gay or a woman
Or a woman, yeah.
or like really anyone other than someone who looks like you, right? And like,
Right.
yeah, get your like, we're about to go woke now, right? Like, where's the woke alarm or something? Because I mean, it does sound like I was woke scolding this person, but no, that's just, and that's the point. I think that's one of the points of that
That's
show
the point of the show,
is
yeah.
just like, if you think this was the best of times, then you only read the first half of, I believe, that sentence from Dickens's A Tale of Two Cities, right? Because the
Right,
best of
right, right.
times, they're always coupled with or situated beside the worst of times. It just depends on who you are, I suppose. But I also wanted to ask you, John, do you have not necessarily favorite moments, but because that's maybe too specific, do you have like a favorite elongated moment or set of moments? Because what I was also thinking about was how we've had to do a lot of iterating with this podcast because of the pandemic, because of moving. You and I, when we started this podcast, we lived approximately 15 minutes away from one another. Currently, we probably live over an hour away from one another. So we've had to navigate a lot of changes. Are there moments that you just thoroughly enjoyed when you look back and think like, that was not that anything outside of that was bad, but just I really enjoyed whatever it was we were doing at those particular moments?
Yeah, I think starting the show, number one, was really fun and very exciting, and because we were trying to like figure out our cadence and our groove and what sounded good where and what went good where, and you were like trying to learn about like we started out not even using like any type of sound like mixer board. We just had two microphones plugged into a sound recorder, and so I would be loud. I would cough all the time. I'd cough constantly. That was one of the worst things. But it was fun to like sort of figure out what we were doing, what it was about. And then I think recording Twin Peaks at your house when you lived in Bristol was really fun. And it was like such a great way to just end my night. Because we started, if I remember correctly, like it was towards the fall when we would start, because I'd get to your house and it'd already be dark. And I would just like get to hang out with you and drink some whiskey and talk about Twin Peaks for now. It was just a great, that was just a great chunk of the podcast. I think it was I enjoyed it, but ultimately my favorite, I'm getting long-winded. I'm sorry. My favorite part of the podcast so far has been from I would say season 4 of Community up until now. I think has been my favorite time. Like we've been in such a great groove. We both have had really funny, stupid bits that have like helped open the show. I think we've taken ourselves less seriously, which is quite nice and quite lovely. And I think that's like my favorite. I think we've hit the peak, and so going out now seems to be the best time. Anyway, what about you?
So this was before the pandemic, and it's similar to the time you were describing, where you had moved from where you previously lived somewhere else because you had started an art history program, which,
Yeah.
because of the pandemic, I don't think you had a chance to finish, which is fine. But it was this period where you would find ways to incorporate the things you were learning in your art
Yeah.
history program, and you would incorporate that into our conversation. And I liked it for a variety of different reasons, but I think primarily because this is, as someone invested in education, this is what I think good education ultimately does, where you work within, a particular discipline or a particular scholastic modality, but you find ways to make these connections outside of the narrow confines of that discipline. And so, and it's not like, I mean, television and art history have a lot of overlap. So it's not like you were discussing like quantum mechanics while
Sure.
we discuss Twin Peaks, although I suspect someone could do that and I would really like to hear that. But you would just find ways to incorporate the things you were learning and studying into that conversation. And yeah, it was delightful because those, of course, were things that I would never consider because I don't have an art history degree. So I would never think about
Yeah.
it in those terms. And I think that's something else that I really enjoyed was how you were able, and you're always able to bring ideas and perspectives that I don't consider and haven't considered. But I think that was one of the moments that I really think about the most, where it's not you necessarily referencing like popular media, but really discussing like the history of art as a way of understanding some of Lynch's aesthetics. That was probably one of my favorite moments because that was a prolonged period before the pandemic started. And
Yeah.
then the pandemic started, and well, I mean, hey, we continued the podcast through the pandemic. That's pretty awesome, don't you think?
We
Yeah,
made it. Everything did go to shit. I mean, I had like a nervous breakdown for like a
yeah,
whole year, basically,
sure.
and it was a lot. It was hard. It was really hard. I mean, everybody was going through it, obviously, but yeah, I think I did miss that. I did miss the in person thing, a lot, and I really loved art history, and I was minoring in cinema studies, so I was learning like a lot of like really deep shit about like the start of film
Yeah.
and how it all began. And I was by the time my second, I guess I'd been at school a year. By the time my second semester was over, I like started to hate movies because I had learned so much about movies. And I thought that's got to be the downfall of what it's like to just study something you love so much. And I thought I would like when we did the podcast, I thought I'm just going to end up hating these shows because we've talked so much about them, and I don't think that necessarily happened. I think for the most part, I learned like a new respect for most of what we watch, especially season 4 of Arrested Development, because we talked about when it came out, and it was just so bad, and we would just be like, "What happened? What the fuck happened?" And watching it and having to like analyze it and think critically about it, I found a newfound respect for it. But I also like it does leave a bad taste in my mouth a little bit. So yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because I think you're right when you insofar as I think when you study something deeply and with a kind of elongated intensity, it changes how you appreciate it. It's hard to like. I remember the first time that I really studied Shakespeare and understood it.
yeah,
I mean, part of the joy of that is just like this sounds like nonsense, and then it starts to not sound like nonsense, and it's really like amazing when it starts to sound like nonsense when you can read it just like you would read anything else,
that's
and you don't
phenomenal.
need to
Yeah,
stop and like I don't know find a definition for every single word, but that that burst of excitement, the exhilaration of that excitement inevitably wanes at some point, and then you really just start to appreciate mechanics, which I think that can feel. I don't know why for not I don't think this, but I think it feels this way for some people. It feels like a way of engaging in something that doesn't feel passionate, I guess. Like when I
oh
when I
sure,
when I think about like the way the way some people interact with certain kinds of media, and I'm sorry, but like their commentary is ostensibly, well, that was awesome and that was funny and that was awesome and that was funny. And I think, okay, like I think it's wonderful that you like that, but if you don't have a sense of how the mechanics work, and I think I sound a bit pompous right now and I don't mean to, how far can that appreciation really go? But once you sit with something long enough, it's really hard to just look at it and say that's awesome. I can't think of the last time I read Hamlet and I thought that's awesome. I don't
it's
have that
pretty
response.
fucking cool, dude.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. I just like I don't have that response to reading it now. But yeah, the level of engagement feels more maybe clinical and methodical, and hopefully what I hope with this podcast, I say all of that because I hope we were able to bring commentary to the things that I think a lot of people really like because they were able to watch it and think that was awesome, that was funny, but we were able to talk about the mechanics of it without necessarily stripping it of all of that, enthusiasm and that initial burst of just enjoyment and appreciation. I think that was always the goal here, was how do we do both of those things simultaneously? And hopefully we were able to do that. But I think, yeah, that can be just echoing what you said. Like, once you start like really living with something for a while, it starts to be just like anything else you live with, where it's like, I don't want to be around you right now because we've been around each other too much. So yeah, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that. I hope that someone out there was like maybe starting their journey with Twin Peaks or something and found us and could latch on, because I think one of the reasons the podcast succeeds and it does so well is because you and I come from like not vastly different minds of thought when it comes to like taking in media. I think we find most of the same things to be quite good. But you can get into something and really sort of tear it apart and find the right symbolism for things, and make me think a level or two deeper than what I initially was thinking. And I'm just like the silly common guy. That's why it works well. Like I have like a very great understanding of movies. I've loved cinema, forever, and that's one of the reasons Colin and I became friends is because we both just loved movies and loved to talk about movies, and Arrested Development was something that linked us together. And then I don't necessarily know that you were like going down that path of this like really critical thinking. This has been almost 20 years by now, but now I think like that is what makes the show work. That's what you need, I think, in a conversation, because if I'm sure intellectual conversation is nice, and there's podcasts about it everywhere, and it happens all the time. But like, I think it's nice to have, and not to say I'm like a fucking idiot, but you get what I'm saying. Like, there's two different schools of thought there, I think, and I think that's what makes the show work. I think that's why people would invest more in us than others, or they should, because we're just better. That's what I'm saying. That's what I'm trying to say here.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think some of it is like Andrew Hicks and I on the Clutter Desk had a conversation about a year ago, discussing this podcast called Maintenance Phase, because they structurally, for the conversation within each episode, do something interesting where one person does a copious amount of research about a topic, and the other person tries to have a conversation with them about it as they're learning, in theory, about something new. And so I think, like, he and I on that podcast episode had a conversation about the importance of knowing how to have a conversation about something that maybe you don't thoroughly understand, like knowing the sorts of questions to ask, knowing how to be skeptical, when to be skeptical. And it's not, I understand what you mean. I think it often felt like it went in one direction, but that's why I really liked those episodes where you would discuss art history, because that put me in a position where I had to ask questions that I because I didn't know what it was you were referencing. And so that's part of what I like about what we've always done, is it's always felt like, at least more often than not, there was someone in a position to ask questions about what the other person wanted to discuss, because they didn't have the same kind of maybe knowledge base or experience or familiarity with it. And I think that also is part of what makes for a great conversation. And I think, like, you were being funny. I know, like, I think you can be reductive and say that means you have a smart one and a dumb one, but I don't think it's like that necessarily. I think it's, you have someone who, and again, these roles can shift and change, right? You have someone who knows a bit or a fair amount about a particular topic or line of conversation, and the other person knows how to be inquisitive about it, because otherwise, it can just feel like someone's talking at someone else, right?
For sure.
Yeah.
Which is the worst kind of conversation, I think.
It's terrible. Yeah.
We had one of those on one of our
Which one?
On one of our Patreon. We had a guest on one of our Patreon episodes. I hope they don't listen to that. At this point, I don't really give a fuck. But it was bad. It was bad. It was just that for 7 hours.
For
I
9 hours.
like I had been lobotomized. I felt like Alex DeLarge in A Clockwork Orange, and I had to like keep my eyes
Yeah,
peeled
you had your
open and
eyes.
just like take in all this terrible stuff. Anyway, no, I get what you're saying. I think podcasts are tricky. There's so many of them, and I think if you don't have a good cadence with someone, if you don't have a good rapport, and it's just great that you and I have known each other for like 20 years because we know how to talk to each other and we've been friends with each other. And I think like we both know the right way to let each other out of the way to have a goof or make a statement or criticize something. And I think that's good. That's how it should be. And I think, people that are just getting into podcasting should envy that about us genuinely, because it's hard to find that. It's hard to find someone you can just banter with and feel comfortable with. And I think like you and I could not record another podcast for a year, and I think we would just dip right back into this. And that's a gift, it's nice.
Yeah, we know our roles. I think good. No, I'm being serious. I think like knowing how to occupy a role with a friend is a good thing. And I think it makes for interesting conversations because we also like, this is a small independent operation. We don't have the privilege of having a producer or having an editor. So as we're having these conversations, we're doing the kinds of work that or the kind of work that a producer might do, where we might need to pause and restate something,
Yeah.
because we don't have someone here who would stop us and say that one more time. It didn't come through as clear. And sometimes we catch it, and sometimes we don't. And that's something else that I've always enjoyed about doing this podcast was how, and this is true with Hicks as well, that we're I think good at knowing when to maybe stop and then to give the mic back to the other person. Not that you and I don't have moments when we, talk quite long and rhapsodically about a particular idea, because
sure.
sometimes that's just part of it. But yeah, it's been an interesting experiment. And it's also, this is something that I've noticed, it's helped me with my job. I think I'm actually a better educator and a better researcher because I started podcasting, because there's just, again, like, if you really want to understand something, try to talk to someone about it, in a kind of like structured way like this, because we're not just like two bros who get in front of a mic and just start talking nonsense in theory about things we don't understand. I think you and I both
Right.
try to understand what it is we want to discuss. And if we don't understand it, we probably won't say anything about it, or at the very least, we'll caveat it as much as possible. So it's given me a structure and a way of understanding how to have conversations that I think has ultimately benefited me in my professional life. And I really like educating people. And I think knowing how to do it this is what I've learned. It's hard. Educating people is really hard to do, and it requires like tonally, like I think we've all probably been in like really boring classes where it's clear whomever's in charge like doesn't have a sense of like tone and
Yeah.
cadence and rhythm and narrative.
Yeah.
That's something that podcasting has helped me with as well, like knowing when to try and be funny. And whether I'm funny or not, often the effort unto itself is hilarious because I
Of
make an
course.
ass of myself, and that can be charming, I suppose, or at least my students seem to think so.
Yeah, and I think it definitely comes through, and especially in episodes where maybe I'll start out not liking the show at all, and by the end I've like completely changed my mind because of what you've said and what you've taught me, and that's important. That's cool, and I love that. I think every time that we get down, we sit down on the mic, it's like I end up learning something. I end up having ideas or thoughts about something, and I don't know. It's a good time. I think I'm gonna miss it. Obviously, uh, it's a lot of work for you. You know, you bust your ass doing this and being a dad and working and everything else. And so it's nice to, I'm sure, for you to be able to just have a break, which is good. But I think I don't see the show like, I know there's going to be things that come out that we're going to want to talk about. I just know it.
Oh
Like I
yeah,
know how we
yeah.
are. I know there's going to be media that hits and we're going to be like, oh my god, we have to talk about this. But I think this show has again, it's nice. It's been nice to have a creative outlet for the last 8 years, and to be able to like just make something.
Hmm.
And I think a lot of people have so, and I for me too, at least so much apathy towards just doing something. And I think without you, being you, it would not have happened. It would not have. I would have just been stuck in that apathetic haze that a lot of people are. And so, I am going to miss that for sure.
Yeah, no, I think that's I think part of why we work well together is because you help me take things less seriously, and you've because I mean this is something like a lot of people probably don't know this about John. Um, you are an incredibly charming person to talk to because
Oh,
you inherently understand what I've had to learn, which is how to incorporate different tonal registers into conversation. Like this is why I've always said like you could be a fantastic professor because you know how those like shifts and fluctuations need to work. That's something I've
yeah,
had to learn. But in the same way that like I don't know, I guess I keep you from like departing from this project to start something else that you'll inevitably stop in like 6
sure,
months. You know,
absolutely,
you've maybe passively done the work of like helping me understand how to have those kinds of conversations and to keep them moving in a way that I think is ultimately quite pleasing to listen to. And
yeah,
so I think that's something not only like thinking about, well, what have we learned from this? What do we enjoy from this? But how has it positively affected and influenced us? I know, like, because you and I have talked about this, like, at times your frustration with your fleeting fascinations with things, like you and I have talked about how that frustrates you. Like, I wish I could just stay
yeah,
on this for a little longer.
yeah, yeah.
And I've always, well, just had trouble talking to people. Like I don't talk well to people. It's like an Asperger's thing. Like I don't like I just like the number of times in my life when I've started a conversation with someone and I've gotten the sense like you're not enjoying this and I don't understand why, or I say a thing and no one understands what I'm talking about. And so like you've helped me learn how to navigate all of that and really I guess
Yeah.
mask in a way because like that's kind of what it means to be on the spectrum is that you're masking a lot, mask in a way that just makes talking to people easier, which has always been a very hard thing for me. Like I don't make friends easily. So yeah, that's been nice. That's been really
Oh,
nice. Like I
thank
know
you,
how to
man.
talk to people. Like I can't like again. I don't know how many of our listeners actually know John in person, but like he enters a space and like people just gravitate towards you. I think like maybe you don't feel this way, but like you can
I
be an
don't
incredibly
know.
charming person to be around. And I see people gravitating towards you. And that's something I've had to learn how to do. Like for the longest time, like I would just get the attention, from my like physical attractiveness. But like I've had to learn how to be like a charming person to like interact with and talk to. So
Yeah,
yeah.
one of my earliest memories of us when we met on Frost, the show, everybody, the most beautiful show in the world.
Iconic.
Um,
Yeah.
you at the time were having trouble with your stutter quite bad
Oh yeah.
on certain words when we
Certain
were
words. Yeah.
performing. And so like I would try my hardest to figure out ways to just change words so that you didn't have to like say these words. And so early on I was like I've taken like a role of like a protector over this person and I would hate to have to murder someone. for him.
We actually talked about ways of like changing a Robert Frost poem so that because I've always had trouble with L's and M's. So
yeah.
we actually cut a word from the beginning of a Frost poem so that I wouldn't stammer at the beginning of it.
Yeah, because the first word was Mary, and it was
Mary, yeah.
And so I would say, let's just say she. Let's just change it to she.
Yeah.
And it worked. Nobody fucking knew. Nobody.
Who knows?
It would be wild if like Robert Frost's great granddaughter was there and like, wait a second, you charlatans.
You sons of bitches. She threw like an apple at us. Yeah, I know.
I think that's it's like what his our like you just had a bond. There's like a media bond that I had with you. It was wild. It's a wild feeling. And then I mean, I think I saw you every day for like 5 years running. I saw you like every single day.
Oh yeah.
That's just insane to think about.
Oh yeah.
Wow. Where'd all the time go? And who would have thought, 20 years from then, we're sitting here talking about, we've done a podcast for 8 years. It's just fucking nuts, honestly.
It's something to think about, yeah. I'm trying to think if there was anything else I wanted to discuss.
I do, really quickly.
Yeah, please.
The fan thing, it's weird to have people listen to us, number one.
Yeah, it's a little bizarre, yeah.
It's strange to have people like compliment us and tell us that like you're my favorite show, and I think one person, maybe Katana, said she listened to us like across the country as she was driving across country
on a road
which
trip.
Is nuts
I think that's what she said.
To think about that we supplanted somebody for 4 days, but like I can remember distinctly Arrested Development when we started it. Traction was really slow, and I thought, I don't care. I just was having a good time. But then when Twin Peaks hit, it was like these fucking crazy people came out of the woodwork to talk to us about Twin Peaks, man. It was just like it's insane the amount of people that love that show, and had really quickly, we got a lot of things to say about Twin Peaks, and I thought, this is nuts. Like, we're getting, I think at that point we hit over like 1,000 followers on Twitter, which was big for us, and
oh yeah.
I think that's when like it really started. People like noticed us and were talking to us, and it was weird. It's always weird when someone says, "Oh, I love your work," and I go, "I don't." Even like Michael, who has been my friend for years.
Yeah.
He's like, "Oh, hey, I listened to the last podcast," and I'm like, "Don't say that. That's so fucking weird."
Oh, Michael is lovely. Yeah.
He is. Lovely.
Yeah. Has taught me so many wonderful things about music that I didn't know. So.
Yeah. But then, like, community, the community's Twitter feed, which I guess is like the end all be all of community Twitter.
It's pretty wild. Like when we finally hit like 1,000 followers before Elon Musk, because I basically left Twitter as well. I thought we were doing great. And then I saw communities, and oh no, they're doing something.
Yeah,
totally
they're doing
different.
great. Yeah. And they would like. I would just love to. I love the idea that there's like almost like Gestapo police of community out there that fucking puts the hammer down, man. If we get something wrong, you're gonna know about it. I find that to be incredibly hilarious and weirdly charming that people do that. It's very funny to me.
Well, I mean, it is interesting to me because I am interested in fandoms and how they form, how they self-regulate, and I think, and this is not a value judgment, but it is something that feels unique to the internet, that something like this could exist. I think the immediacy of the communication is part of what makes it interesting. It's not like before the internet that you couldn't, like, I don't know, send a letter to an author if you knew their address or something.
Sure.
But yeah, the way, like, because I know I've listened to a few other community podcasts and they talked about how, like, they've been in this community, some of them for 15 years or something, like
Holy
initially
fuck.
like interacting not just on Twitter but on like different like blog spaces, They were
wow,
part
yeah.
of that. They were part of that campaign. I think at the end of like maybe season 4 or something, they were really vocal about either firing or not firing Dan Harmon. I mean, some of them like even like this is like early days of Twitter, right? Like Dan Harmon actually interacting with some of these people on Twitter, you know?
Fucking nuts. That's fucking nuts.
Yeah, it's nuts to
Parasocial
think about.
relationships with fans is so interesting to me and so
Yeah, me too.
weird.
Me too.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. But no, I agree with you, John. Just the people and those patrons, whether you're a patron or not, like I don't want you to think that like, well, but to be quite frank, like the people who want to talk to us the most seem to be patrons.
Sure.
Those who have been with us the longest, it's pretty remarkable. And some of them are just friends of ours, personal friends like Perry and Rob.
Yeah.
But Andrew, Mary Beth, you know who you are.
Oh, Mary Beth, yeah.
Yeah, this patron, I believe Victoria, who you might remember them from the Arrested Development days. They would send us like scripts that helped us understand
yeah.
everything. To even some of our newer patrons like Robin and Rob, Kate, Rachel. I'll just go ahead and like read everyone's name at some point, but like these people who have supported us for a really long time.
Yeah.
Did I mention Lars? Like Lars has been with us as well. Like I don't even think he's like in a Western country. It's just amazing.
That's
Like
wild.
these
It's fucking
people
nuts.
who have
Yeah.
like stayed with us for so long and been so incredibly thoughtful and generous with their time and their money.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's fascinating. I can remember when we did the very first Patreon post, the May and Egg. It was way up there.
That would have been an early one. We did like stuff like the Bluth Power the non-Bluth Power ranking
The
was a
non-blue
favorite.
power ranking,
Yeah,
which was very fun.
that was
Yeah.
awesome. Yeah.
The May and Egg. I know we did like a whole the Jude Law PowerPoint that you did with all the Jude Law Captain Hook shows. Forget about
Correct.
it.
Yeah, that was a sequel to the Young Pope podcast ideas that I had.
Which made me fucking laugh. God, those were funny, man. Those were probably like the talking about the Young Pope podcast on the main feed early. I think I would laugh until I almost like shit myself. I'd laugh so much.
It was like episode 7 because if you remember this, I did one ba with the ba, the bang, diggy diggy. There's a new pope in Vatican City. Kid Rock's sister was on that episode. Do you remember that? She was the PR person.
I do.
Do you remember this?
I do. Yeah. She's the woman that the PR consultant.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Oh my god.
Pope My Ride. That was weird. I don't know what I
Pope
was
my
thinking.
ride. Fuck me. It's still great. It's still gold. He's still got it. Anyway, I guess that's about it. I mean, thank you for listening. Thank you for being there, and Colin, thank you for all the memories, man. This has been one of my most cherished times of my life, and I'm so honored to have been here to do this with you. Genuinely,
I feel the same way. And we forgot to do this last time. Let's thank our patrons one last time. So thank you to the following patrons. I'll just go ahead and thank every active patron that we have. Everyone, okay? So thank you to John, Ira, Deadline 63, Anthony, Ming, Mimi, Thomas, Katana, Mitchell, Crindy, Rachel, Kate, Daniel, Lars, Rob, Robin, Rob, Jeff, Perry, producer Jeff. I want everyone to know that's our special producer friend, Jeff. Jeff, Perry, Victoria, and Andrew. We still have Patreon stuff coming, just to be clear. So
Yes.
we'll
Yeah.
release a few additional. I'll post something to the Patreon feed at some point, either today or tomorrow, just summarizing some of the things we've discussed. But yeah, this will be, for now at least, the last proper episode on the main feed, even though we'll have some stuff on Patreon for this month and a few additional things for next month.
All right. I guess that's it. So, I guess right about here you can start playing the nice music because
I could do that. Yeah.
it would be great. Colin, I love you, and I'll talk to you later.
I love you too, buddy. Oh, I forgot to mention something. I was watching an early season 1 episode of Arrested Development. I noticed a joke that I hadn't heard before when they burned the banana stand. And it's when Michael says to George Michael, take your niece with you. Lindsay says, if I know my daughter, that stand won't be there in a week.
Lying in a bed of roses.
I never noticed that.
And the rain come down. Sunshine through my fingers.